David didn't scream when he found out. He didn't throw a tantrum, didn't overturn a table, didn't even raise his voice. The woman he'd spent the last 7 years with was sleeping with her boss, George, of all people, and she confessed to it with the poise of someone discussing weather. It just happened, David. You were always so busy. He stared at her across the dining table, a bowl of half-eaten soup cooling between them. When? He asked, voice steady. Mary blinked slowly. A few months ago. It started after the conference in Vienna. No panic. No guilt. Not even shame. Her expression held a strange softness, like she was trying to console a colleague being let go. She wasn't even sorry. The divorce talk was civil. They divided assets neatly, item by item, like spreadsheets. She didn't argue about the cars, didn't want the stocks. The only thing she insisted on, repeatedly, was the apartment. The first one. The place David had bought fresh out of grad school, pouring every cent of his savings into the down payment. The 2-bedroom with the peeling paint and bad plumbing where they'd eaten instant noodles on the floor their first night. That place. That was what Mary wanted. He didn't understand it, not at first. They hadn't lived there in years. He owned 5 other properties now, bigger, brighter, newer. That old apartment was a relic, one he had emotionally packed away years ago. So why was she so adamant? On the day they drove to the Civil Affairs Bureau, the city outside their windshield was silent, blanketed in fog. Mary hummed a song under her breath, tapping her fingers lightly on her lap. She looked content. David kept his eyes on the road. Why that apartment? He asked, his tone even. Why not the others? You never even liked that one. Mary turned to him slowly, her lashes fluttering as if the question had amused her. George thinks it's poetic, she said with a faint smile. He said if we're going to start fresh, he wants to erase every trace of my past. The apartment matters. It's where you and I started. He wants it gone. Her brows lifted, her tone almost playful. So childish, right? That was the moment the skin around David's knuckles tightened against the steering wheel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't warn her. He simply pulled the car over, turned to face her, and without a hint of hesitation, delivered a slap so clean, so sudden, it cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Mary's head snapped to the side, hair falling across her face. A line of blood trickled from her nose, dotting the cream-colored scarf she had so delicately chosen for the occasion. She didn't speak. Didn't scream. Just sat there, stunned, lips parted, breathing shallow. David watched her carefully. There was no satisfaction in his expression. Only silence. In that instant, he realized something sharp and permanent had shifted. She hadn't looked that alive in years. Not during their vacations, not on anniversaries, not when he surprised her with the keys to their second house. She looked happiest not when they were married. But while divorcing him. David had always been measured, everything about him was defined by control. Control of his time, his money, his emotions. Growing up in a quiet household where feelings were buried and logic was applauded, he learned early on that emotions only made things messy. So he organized his life into goals and outcomes. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not if he wanted to succeed. And yet, somehow, Mary had slipped past that filter. She was unpredictable. Warm. Messy in a way that drew him in like gravity. He didn't love loudly, but he let her in when no one else could get close. He was 24 when they moved into the 2-bedroom unit on Fairview Street. The building was a mess, thin walls, creaky plumbing, and a permanent mildew smell in the hallway, but when they got the keys, Mary laughed like they'd just inherited a palace. She bounced from wall to wall with her arms stretched out, measuring space for dream furniture they couldn't yet afford. They had nothing back then. No dining table. No couch. Their first meal was ramen eaten straight out of the pot, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. David remembered every detail. The way she leaned into him, the plastic fork she stole from his hand, the off-tune song she hummed while unpacking. He had just gotten an offer from a private tech firm overseas, a dream position. 6 figures, company equity, relocation package. But Mary had been accepted into a graduate program at the university nearby. She hesitated to celebrate when she found out about his offer. She didn't want him to choose. But he did. Quietly. Without a scene. He declined the job and took a local consulting role instead. It paid less than half but kept him close. He didn't tell her until much later. Just told her, "I'll handle the bills. You focus on school." It wasn't romantic. It was just logical to him. A simple equation. What she wanted, what he could provide. An input for a result. He paid for the tuition, the rent, the groceries, the bus fares. He even worked nights delivering food to cover the gaps. She never knew about that. She just noticed how tired he looked sometimes and started packing him extra snacks. He'd watch her study in the cramped living room, glasses sliding down her nose, hair tied in a lazy bun. She used to wear his oversized sweaters when she got cold. Sometimes she'd fall asleep on the couch, book still open on her chest. David never said it, but those were the nights he felt most at peace. Years passed. His career accelerated. Promotions stacked. Bonuses came. He moved them into a larger home, a sleek penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the harbor. Then came a second property, a vacation rental, an investment duplex. Mary decorated them all like they were Pinterest boards. Guests always complimented her taste. But she never smiled the way she used to in the old place. The Fairview apartment was long forgotten. Or so he thought. Until the divorce. She didn't want the cars. Didn't argue about his business equity. Barely blinked at the stocks. But when they reached the section about the properties, she paused. Her finger tapped beside the line item, Fairview apartment. "I want this one," she said. David raised an eyebrow. "Fairview?" She nodded. "It's the only one that matters." He stared at her, puzzled. "You hated it. You said it was claustrophobic." "It's nostalgic now," she said with a soft smile. He didn't argue. At that moment, he almost felt something close to relief. Maybe, despite everything, she still held on to something. Maybe she remembered how they started. Maybe this was her way of apologizing, for the affair she refused to explain, for the apology she never gave. He thought the apartment meant something to her the way it did to him. He had built that home with the last of his youth and savings. Scrubbed mold from the bathroom tiles with his bare hands. Cooked every dinner on that tiny 2-burner stove. That apartment carried the sound of their first real fight and the silence of their first night reconciling. It held more history than any of their 5-star homes. David had no interest in keeping it, but knowing she wanted it for the memories made it easier to let go. He still didn't know. Still didn't realize that she didn't want the memories. She wanted the theater. She wanted George, her boss, her affair partner, to strip the walls, rip out the last trace of their shared past, and repaint it in his name. A ceremonial erasure. A celebration of conquest. It wasn't sentiment. It was symbolism. And David, the ever-logical man, never suspected the depth of cruelty people cloaked behind a smile. He remembered their last night in that apartment. She had fallen asleep with her head in his lap, warm takeout containers scattered around them. It had been raining, soft drops tapping the windows in rhythm. Her final exams were the next day. She had been stressed, exhausted. David let her sleep. He muted the TV and just watched her breathe, her chest rising and falling slowly. He remembered brushing a lock of hair from her cheek and thinking, "This is all I need." But love, he would later realize, doesn't survive in silence. It needs tending. Words. Presence. He gave her stability, not passion. Security, not attention. Mary wanted to be seen, not just supported. When she found George, he was everything David wasn't: loud, expressive, performative. He wrote good morning texts in rhyme. He brought her coffee with hearts drawn on the cup. He whispered promises in her ear while she stood in the kitchen David paid for. She started dressing differently. Speaking differently. Laughing like the girl who once danced barefoot in Fairview's living room. David noticed the change but didn't know what to call it. So he said nothing. Assumed it was just one of her phases. Even when the late nights began. The work trips. The phone left face down. Even when she stopped reaching for his hand when they crossed the street. He remained calm. Rational. Because that was who he was. But now, sitting beside her in a silent car, her cheek still bruised from the slap she had earned with her mouth, he realized how deep the numbness ran. He didn't feel anger. Or regret. Or longing. He just felt hollow. Like someone had packed up every last feeling he'd once called home and walked out the front door with the keys. Mary crossed her legs and looked out the window, unbothered. "I'll decorate the apartment myself," she murmured. "I want to make it mine." David didn't respond. But something deep in him, something old and buried, shifted. She was taking the only piece of history he still believed in. And she was handing it over to a man who'd never slept on that floor with empty stomachs and shared dreams. David didn't know yet how far he'd go. But he knew this much. He would never let her rewrite their story as George's victory parade. The elevator ride to the Civil Affairs Bureau was quiet. David stood with his hands in his pockets, back straight, eyes locked on the floor number display. Mary scrolled through her phone beside him, nails tapping lightly on the screen. She wore white that day. A cashmere coat with a satin collar, pearl earrings, and lipstick in a shade too loud for a legal ending. She looked more like a woman going to brunch than someone about to dismantle a decade-long marriage. He caught a glimpse of the phone. A message from George at the top. "Don't forget the apartment key. I want to start gutting it tonight." David didn't flinch. They reached the 3rd floor. The doors opened. He waited until they stepped out into the corridor before speaking. "You still haven't told me," he said, his voice calm. "Why the Fairview apartment? Why that one?" Mary smiled without turning to look at him. "You really want to know?" He stopped walking. "Yes." She turned then, slowly, like someone preparing for a monologue. "Because George says it's poetic," she replied, her voice almost sweet. "He said he can't sleep knowing I ever belonged to someone else. The apartment is the last trace. He wants to replace your presence. Clean it. Rebuild it." She tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "It's kind of romantic, isn't it?" David blinked. Mary stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "He told me he wants to burn the bed frame, David. The one you built. Said he'll build a new one, stronger. One I'll actually enjoy." Her smile widened. "I didn't tell him I already did." For a second, nothing existed. David looked at her, at the woman he had once carried home from a clinic when she'd fainted from exhaustion, at the woman who used to leave him notes in the fridge that said things like "eat first. I love you more than deadlines." Now she stood here, glowing with pleasure at his pain. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He raised his hand and slapped her. It wasn't violent. It was surgical. Her head jerked sideways, hair scattering, the slap echoing through the corridor like a punctuation mark. She staggered back a step, stunned. And then came the performance. "Are you crazy?" she shrieked, holding her cheek. "What is wrong with you?" A staff member behind a glass window looked up. David didn't blink. "You cheat. I react. Now I'm the villain?" Mary glared at him, her voice rising into hysteria. "You hit a woman. You're abusive. I should have left you years ago." He smiled faintly. "And I should have let you rot in that 1st-floor apartment." She gasped. He stepped forward, his tone dropping into ice. You painted me cold, Mary. Selfish. Emotionally absent. You said I was never there. But I paid your tuition. I gave up my job. I built a life for you brick by brick. And you gave your body to the first man who told you you had nice handwriting. She snapped, because he saw me, David. He saw me. Not just as some quiet investment project. He made me feel alive. David tilted his head. Is that what he does? Replaces the furniture and calls it rebirth? Her lips curled into a sneer. At least he doesn't control everything. At least I'm not living with a robot. And yet, David said flatly, you wore the necklace I gave you for 5 years straight. Funny. For a woman craving chaos, you sure held on to order. Her face tightened. Don't turn this around on me. He chuckled once, dry and bitter. I'm not turning anything. I'm stopping it. She stepped back. What does that mean? David looked at the door marked Civil Affairs Registration. Then at her. It means I'm not divorcing you. Mary stared at him. You, what? He met her gaze. You wanted dignity? No. I want vengeance. She blinked rapidly, her poise slipping. You can't do that. I already did, he said, voice flat. The paperwork's not signed. I can withdraw anytime. You're insane. No, he said. I'm patient. There's a difference. Her breathing quickened. George is waiting inside. We already told them. Then tell him, David said calmly, to wait longer. Tell him you're still mine. She slapped him back then, but it was sloppy. Emotional. He didn't move. Just smiled, the same way one might smile at a child throwing a tantrum in a store aisle. You're not afraid of pain, he said. That's good. You'll need that strength soon. Her eyes widened. You want to replace me? He continued. Fine. But I won't make it easy. I won't give you the apartment. I won't give you closure. I won't even give you a timeline. Mary's voice cracked. You're bluffing. David leaned in close, his breath brushing her ear. Every day you stay married to me, George's hands will tremble when he touches you. Because he'll know, you still wear my name. And with that, he turned, walked down the hall, and left her standing in silence, palm still pressed to her bruised cheek, staring at the door that promised freedom. But she wouldn't walk through it today. Because David had changed the locks. David sat alone in the corner of the hotel room, the curtains drawn, the city lights outside muted by thick blackout fabric. The silence was heavy, the kind that pressed against the walls like it wanted to suffocate him. His phone lay on the nightstand, face down, notifications long muted. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Not really. Not since that night in the hospital. He'd collapsed from acute appendicitis. The pain had torn through his body like knives. A bystander had rushed him to the ER, and he remembered clenching his fists as they wheeled him into surgery, trying to breathe through the agony. Mary didn't answer his calls. He remembered the harsh white light of the recovery room, the 4-drip hissing beside him, and the nurse handing him his phone. You might want to let someone know you're okay, she had said gently. He had tried. Dozens of missed calls to Mary. Not one answered. And then came the message. From an unknown number. Just one line of text. Your girl's with me tonight. Hope you feel better soon, bro. Attached was a photo. It took him a second to process it. The man was grinning wide, half naked, tattoos sprawling across his chest. He sat on a bed, selfie arm extended, giving the camera a peace sign. And just barely, at the edge of the frame, was Mary, her hands over her face, her body turned away, her legs curled under the sheets. David's fingers had gone numb. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then closed his eyes. And felt nothing. No anger. No sorrow. Just a dull ache that spread deeper than the surgical scar ever could. He knew George by then, knew him from the occasional office party, the firm-wide meetings. Flashy. Loud. The kind of man who wore his ego like a cologne. David had never liked him, but he never imagined Mary would choose that. Or maybe she didn't choose. Maybe she drifted. He wasn't sure what hurt more. When he left the hospital the next morning, Mary finally showed up. Her makeup was fresh. She looked annoyed more than concerned. "You shouldn't have called so much," she said, setting down a fruit basket. "It made things complicated." He hadn't replied. She looked around the hospital room, disgusted by the sterile tiles and the thin sheets. "This place smells awful." Then she looked at him and added, "David, love is about fulfillment. You can't stop me from finding something better." She said it as if it were a favor. As if she were freeing him. And maybe, in a way, she was. But not the way she thought. That same week, he cancelled all his meetings, took indefinite leave from the firm, and walked into a boxing gym for the first time in his life. It wasn't about rage. It wasn't even about Mary or George, not entirely. It was about clarity. He remembered the first time he hit a bag. The glove smacked against the leather with a sound that echoed through the room. His trainer corrected his stance. Again. And again. Until every strike had rhythm. Purpose. Precision. Boxing wasn't about flailing emotion. It was about cold focus. It made sense to him. That was the first time in weeks that anything made sense. David had always hated chaos. He grew up watching his father sink into it. A man who never once raised his voice, but who shrank a little more each year, his shoulders caving under the weight of betrayal. David's mother cheated 4 times. Each time she returned with tears and promises. Each time his father forgave her. David would find him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at old photographs with eyes that were already somewhere else. He kept her name on the lease. Kept her toothbrush in the bathroom. Let her come and go like a ghost. The neighborhood pitied him. The men mocked him. The women smiled politely and whispered behind his back. And David? David sat in his room, fists clenched, swearing on everything he had that he would never end up like that. He kept that promise for 30 years. Until Mary. Until the moment he fell for her radiant energy, her chaotic warmth. Until the moment he said yes to staying, instead of leaving for the better job overseas. Until the moment he bent his own rules and let her in. He let himself love. He let himself believe that this time would be different. And now here he was, standing in the ruins of his own logic, wondering when he lost the version of himself he respected. Not anymore. Not again. In the gym, he trained harder. Longer. He built muscle not for strength, but for control. When he hit the bag, he pictured not Mary's face, but the silence of that hospital room. The chill of betrayal. The smirk on George's face. He didn't want to break them. He wanted to disassemble them. Piece by piece. Publicly. Legally. With grace. That was the only kind of revenge that would satisfy the numbness now blooming in his chest. No screaming. No threats. No pleading. Only silence. And strategy. He spent nights watching legal videos, reading about asset separation loopholes, studying emotional abuse statutes and defamation laws. He contacted his lawyer under the guise of finalizing the divorce. But every clause in the agreement was designed to trap. If George thought this was going to be a clean handover, he was mistaken. If Mary thought this was going to be a quiet separation, she'd underestimated the man she married. David wouldn't touch them with rage. He'd touch them with precision. Like a scalpel. Like a right hook to the chin that no one saw coming. He didn't want her back. He wanted her reputation in pieces. He wanted the world to know who she really was. What she threw away. And what kind of man she chose instead. He didn't care who sympathized. He would make sure everyone watched. Revenge wasn't about reaction. That was for the weak. The loud. The impulsive. Revenge, real revenge, had to be clean. And it had to be public. Saturday at the Grand Arcade Mall smelled like citrus polish and pretzel grease. Shoppers moved in slow, predictable currents beneath glass skylights, children tugged at strollers, a couple argued softly over shoe sizes near the central fountain. David spotted them by the boutique with the rose gold sign, Mary and George, arms linked like a staged photograph. She wore the same silver necklace he had once slipped into her palm on a winter night. It caught the light and winked like a secret. George talked fast, his laugh too loud for the place, the kind of performance that needed an audience. They looked content, which somehow made them more obscene. David walked toward them like someone on a mission measured in steps. He didn't hurry. He didn't glare. He carried himself the way you carry a verdict, calm, inevitable. People stepped aside politely as if he smelled of authority. He still had his gloves on from the gym, the calluses on his knuckles settling into a memory. In his pocket his phone buzzed with a lawyer's text confirming a meeting for the following week. Another message was a draft of revised terms. He slid the phone into his pocket and kept his gaze on Mary. When she saw him, her face went through a quick succession of emotions: surprise, irritation, a practiced defiance. George unhooked his arm and moved forward with that protective, performative gait. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he barked, half indignation, half bravado. David stopped 2 steps away. "Shopping," he said. His voice was flat, precise. "Saw you on the escalator." A small crowd had already begun to gather, the foot traffic curious. Someone pointed a phone toward them, another lowered a camera, a child's shriek somewhere muffled the mall's ambient hum. Mary's lips tightened. George's jaw worked. "You should leave," George said, trying to sound firm. "This isn't for you." "It would be easier if you walked away," David replied. "But you never liked easy, did you?" George stepped forward, less in menace than in posturing. "You hurt her," he said. "You hit her in public. You don't get to show up and—" David cut him off with a tilt of his head. "Make me leave?" he asked. "Or make her leave? Which is it?" George's bravado slipped, visible in his hands that strayed toward his pockets like a man remembering he had no weapon beyond his mouth. A recording light blinked on a dozen phones. The air smelled of perfume and uncertainty. Someone near the fountain murmured, "Is that the guy from the video?" David didn't answer. He watched Mary, watched the little twitch at the corner of her mouth that used to mean guilt. He watched the necklace, a glinting loop of memory placed as an accessory on her ankle or throat depending on the performance. He thought of the nights they'd spent in that first apartment, the way she'd traced his palm with a thumb that had once been gentle. He felt none of that now, only the cold exactness of a man deciding which move to play next. Then he moved. It was not a wild swing. It was not a shout. It was a clean, deliberate strike, the kind he'd practiced on heavy bags until his shoulders memorized the motion. His hand connected with Mary's cheek in a way that made a sound like a light clap muffled by velvet. Heads turned. One person gasped. Someone's camera zoomed in. Mary's body tilted, and for a moment she hovered, stunned, like a dancer caught off balance. And the world narrowed to a single, sharp image, the silver necklace lifting, a glint, then arcing away as Mary stumbled backward and the pendant flew loose. It spun once, twice, and landed on the marble like an exclamation point. Mary's scream broke reality, a high, theatrical sound that filled the atrium and fed the phone's microphones. "You, how dare you," she shrieked, pressing her hand to her cheek more from habit than need. "You hit a woman. You're insane. Someone call security." George moved then, half protector, half affronted lover, reaching for Mary as if to shield her from the humiliation. "I told you to keep your hands to yourself," he said to David, voice strained. "Apologize. Now." David's face did not change. He watched George's fingers twitch as if measuring whether to shove him away or to raise his voice to attract sympathy. Apologize? David repeated softly. For what? For seeing what you did and speaking up? For noticing who you really are? The crowd had stopped shopping and collected like an audience for an unplanned theater piece. One woman raised her phone on a selfie stick and mouthed, "Is he going to beat her?" Another older man muttered about the decline of morals. Teenagers filmed with horrified delight. Everything was being recorded, and that recording was already something else, not private, not small. Viral moments did not require kings or courts, they required coincidence and a camera lens. Security arrived 15 seconds later, walking too slowly, as if they had to check their uniform's creases. An employee in a blue blazer asked for explanations, then looked at the phones and sagged. "We'll need statements," he said, as if reading from a handbook. Someone had dialed the police, someone else already uploaded a 30-second clip with a caption, "Man hits wife in mall, unbelievable." David lifted his chin and bowed his head slightly as an automatic gesture when security flanked them. He apologized, but it was the art of apology, not the substance. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "I lost my temper. I shouldn't have done that." No excuses. Cameras magnified the apology into sincerity. Netizens would later dissect the cadence of his words, find the lies or the truth. For now, it was enough. His lawyer had told him to show contrition. The optics mattered. Show the human flaw, then demonstrate the calculated rightness of the follow-up. Show the apology, absorb the immediate backlash, and then let the evidence tell the rest. The police came, clipboard clicking, faces unreadable. Mary filed a statement with practiced precision, her words full of fury and tremor, augmented by a pout that would later be called courageous when filtered through persuasive social media lenses. George claimed injury, presenting a small bruise he said came from the earlier scuffle. He needed a story where he was wounded by his rival and noble in defense of his woman. David was cooperative. He repeated the apology into a recorder. He accepted the perfunctory legal procedures with the detached calm of a man who had rehearsed for this eventuality. The officer's eyebrows rose at one point and then settled. "There is insufficient evidence for detention," the officer said, eyes briefly flashing to a nearby security camera that had recorded the entire scene from multiple angles. "This may be a matter for civil mediation." David's lawyer arrived like a shadow. She signed paperwork, whispered into his ear, and then emerged with a careful statement. There would be fines, symbolic, public, measurable, and David would accept them as an act of contrition. He handed over a check for a small sum, framed in the language of restitution. 250 yuan, the officer declared, not a number that would ruin a man but sufficient to satisfy the formality. The crowd recorded the exchange as if it were a transaction in a market, pain for money, reputation for currency. George's face tightened into a mask of righteous hurt. He demanded criminal charges, spoke of abuse and public safety. But the video from another camera showed the moment before the strike, Mary laughing with George as they turned from a display window, an exchange that could be interpreted as flirtation, not assault. Intent mattered in law and in the court of public opinion. George had no proof of premeditated intent beyond outrage and a bruise he could point to. The crowd dispersed slowly, gossip and speculation trailing in their wake. Phones pinged as clips were shared, reshared, described, and argued over. In minutes the first uploads were live on platforms, in an hour the comments multiplied into arguments, some condemning David outright, some praising him as a wronged husband finally breaking free from passivity. The narrative bifurcated into two parallel truths. David walked out of the mall before the police finished their paperwork, his shoulders the same measured width they'd always been. He did not run. He did not hide. He didn't need to. He had given the performance that needed to be given, an apology, a check, a show of compliance. He had also left the symbol, the necklace, loose and lost in the crowd for someone else to find, a little piece of their shared past kicked into public hands. As he reached the curb, he turned once, and the phrase he had practiced without ever saying aloud clicked into his mind, sharp and satisfied. He allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch his lips. "Go ahead," he said under his breath, not for the crowd but for the man who still lingered by the fountain with an injured expression. "Provoke me again. I still have a month to change my mind." By the time David left the mall and the fine was paid, the first clip had already reached 5 million views. The sound of his slap, crisp and controlled, had been looped over dozens of trending audios. One video slowed it down to cinematic effect, layered with dramatic violin music. Another stitched it with a meme caption, "When your ex tries to keep the necklace you bought her and your apartment." Half the internet cheered him on. The comments flooded in. Finally a man with a backbone. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. Just clapped back. Mary had that coming. You cheat, you get smacked. Simple math. David is the coldest MF I've seen all year. Salute. But just as many condemned him. Violence is never the answer. This is textbook abuse. Just because she cheated doesn't make him right. He's clearly unhinged. I'd be scared to be in a room alone with him. David said nothing. Not yet. Instead, he opened his folder, the one he had been building since that night in the hospital. And he uploaded everything. The screenshots. The texts from George while David was sedated in surgery. "Bro, your girl's scared of thunder. Guess I'm staying over." Smirking face. The selfie. George shirtless in David's marital bed, Mary curled into his side, hair covering her face, the silver necklace glittering just barely beneath her collarbone. And the receipts. Mary's hotel bookings. All paid from the joint account. The caption on David's post was short. "Since we're all here now, let's see the whole story." It exploded. Suddenly the tone shifted. Sympathy surged his way like floodwater breaking a dam. Mary's image as the helpless, wronged woman cracked at the edges. So she was cheating while he was in surgery? Nah. I'm switching sides. He slapped her? Okay. But that guy mocked him in his own house. I'd have used a chair. Where are the abuse allegations now? She was having an affair for months and still wanted his money? Mary tried to save face. She posted a carefully lit video with soft piano music playing in the background, tears in her eyes, voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt David. I just fell out of love. George was there when David wasn't. He saw me. He made me feel alive. I never asked for all this attention. I just wanted peace." It was shared, reposted, then ridiculed. The comment section tore her apart. You didn't want attention but wore his necklace to cheat in his house? You looked plenty alive booking hotel rooms with his joint account. Take responsibility. Women aren't exempt from being trash. Then George made the fatal mistake. He posted a series of clips, holding Mary's hand, kissing her belly, now just barely rounded, toasting with champagne on a yacht. His caption read, "Let the haters talk. My queen and I are unbothered. #TrueLove, #NewBeginnings, #haters make us famous." He had tagged the name of their employer in one of the stories by accident. By noon the next day, the company released a formal statement. "We are deeply disappointed to learn of the personal conduct of Mr. George T. and Ms. Mary L., which directly violates our employee code of ethics and public image standards. Effective immediately, both contracts have been terminated. Both of them, fired." And it didn't stop there. A popular wedding blog reposted the viral content with the headline, "Cancelled, influencer couple's livestream wedding pulled over improper values scandal." The platform that had offered to sponsor Mary and George's upcoming wedding pulled their support. Their livestream deal evaporated. Their guest list started thinning out. Brands ghosted. Endorsements disappeared. All within 72 hours. And David? David simply updated his bio. CEO. Strategist. Divorcee. Full custody of karma. Behind the scenes, he moved fast. He amended the divorce agreement. The original terms had offered Mary a modest settlement, a slice of his real estate, a stock bundle, and the car they bought together. All gone. Now the revised agreement demanded she walk away with nothing. His lawyer called. "She'll never sign that." David replied, "She will." Because he had seen the pregnancy test in her bag. The soft bulge under the white dress. And he knew George would never wait through another delay. And David had one more play. He sent Mary a message. "You want to marry him, don't you? Wear the dress before your waist outgrows it. Then sign the agreement. Quietly. No prenup. No appeal. Just ink on paper." She signed 3 days later. Alone. Behind George's back. He found out when the news leaked. Sources confirm Mary L. has finalized her divorce and waived all claims to her ex-husband's estate. George fainted at a cafe. His phone, mid-swipe, still displayed the livestream comment section, where his followers were now calling him jobless, broke, and pregnant with a liability. Should have stayed out of rich men's marriages. He thought he was the upgrade. Turns out he was just the receipt. David took a vacation. He didn't post many pictures. Just a few: clear ocean, a hand gripping a cocktail glass, toes in sand, sunglasses reflecting a cloudless sky. But his livestream account kept growing. Hundreds of thousands of followers now watched him casually discuss contract loopholes, reputation recovery, and how not to lose everything in a modern divorce. The hashtags trended. Hashtag karma served cold. Hashtag reverse Uno divorce. Hashtag David the strategist. In one short video, he answered a fan's question. "How do you feel now that she's gone and broke?" David smiled slightly. "I feel lighter." And he closed the video with a sip of his drink and a glance at the horizon. David stood barefoot on the soft sand, waves lapping at the edge of the beach like applause. The sky above him was a cinematic gradient, lavender bleeding into gold. Behind him, his suite's balcony opened to a private infinity pool. In front of him, the livestream chat exploded with hearts, fire emojis, and comments begging for another story time. He glanced at the screen, adjusted the camera angle slightly, and let out a slow breath. "I never planned to go viral," he said. "But if you're going to be dragged through hell, you may as well pick up the matchstick." The audience cheered in real time. Behind every viewer was the same reason they clicked: scandal, justice, and the catharsis of watching a man who had lost everything take it all back, methodically, publicly, and without blinking. Meanwhile, across the world, Mary was panicking. The bank had frozen one of her accounts due to missed payments. The platform had permanently blacklisted both her and George for reputation violations and falsified brand value claims. Sponsors disappeared overnight. Their shared public image shattered like cheap glass. And now, thanks to the leaked HR documents David had quietly forwarded through a burner email, their real names, salaries, and even George's falsified credentials were all online. George tried to fight back. He launched a channel, at King George Returns, posting motivational reels with titles like "How I Overcame Public Shame" and "They Want You to Fail." The backdrop was always the same: dim lighting, fake Rolex, a whiteboard that said "Haters equals free PR." He managed 2 videos before the platform flagged his content. Then came the ban. The reasons were vague. Terms like platform trust violation and targeted harassment floated in the termination notice. Mary attempted to pivot, rebranding herself as a feminine growth coach, preaching the importance of softness and self-love. But every time she went live, the comments filled with the same mockery. Did George approve this message? Where's the necklace? You should have kept the apartment. At least you could sublease it. Her debt had ballooned. Severance was withheld due to breach of conduct. Legal fines from the marriage clause David enforced post-revision amounted to over $900,000. She started selling handbags on private auctions. But everyone knew. Everyone watched. And David? David was booked for his first television interview. But before that, there was one last task. The reunion. His old college roommate had texted him twice already. "Hey man, just a heads up, Mary and George are coming. Sure you still want to do this?" David replied only once. "Front row. Don't be late." The event was held at a rooftop bar. Wine flowed. Small talk circled. Old friends exchanged gossip wrapped in polite smiles. But the moment David walked in, pressed linen shirt, minimal watch, posture like a man who never flinched, the room shifted. Eyes followed him. He moved through the crowd like gravity. George was already 2 drinks in, laughing a little too loud, clinging to a woman who used to be one of Mary's friends. His suit looked expensive but didn't fit right. His collar drooped. Mary stood beside him in silence. She wore white again. The color meant nothing now. George raised his glass toward David. "Look who made time from his global tour." David smiled back. "George. You know, I still think that slap was a bit theatrical," George said, laughing with hollow bravado. "But hey, views are views, right?" David sipped his drink. "Glad you remember it. Must be hard to forget something that left a mark." The group chuckled nervously. George leaned forward. "But hey, I still got the girl." David set his glass down gently. "George," he said, "you didn't get the girl. You got the invoice." The laughter this time wasn't nervous. It was explosive. Some coughed into their napkins. One classmate said damn under their breath. Mary's smile vanished. George's face froze. David didn't stop. He turned to Mary. "How's the wedding planning? Still pretending the pregnancy is under control?" A visible ripple passed through the crowd. Mary opened her mouth, but no words came. "And George," David added with clinical precision, "did you ever find the laptop you lost? The one with all the passwords saved?" "No?" "Strange. That's the one with all your fake degree files." George paled. "You." "I didn't leak them," David said. "I just gave them to someone who hates liars more than I do." Silence dropped like a hammer. David reached for his glass again. "Anyway. I didn't come to gloat." He let the pause breathe. "I came to watch." Someone in the back clapped. A few followed. Then more. Phones lifted. Someone live-streamed the moment. The clip would later go viral, captioned, "David shuts down his ex and her side piece in front of 100 people without raising his voice." The top comment would read, "This isn't revenge. This is execution." Later that night, David stood outside on the balcony, city lights flickering below. His phone buzzed with a new wave of followers. His inbox held an invite from a major podcast and an inquiry for a book deal. He ignored both for now. From behind him, a voice spoke. Soft, clear, curious. "You don't smile often," Sarah said. He turned. She was a colleague of someone's cousin, vaguely remembered from an old group project. She had warm eyes and a calm presence. Her hair was tied back loosely, her dress simple. No performance. No intention. Just presence. "Maybe," he said. "I'm still learning how." She stepped beside him. "Well, you won." David looked down at the city. "No," he replied. "I survived." She nodded. "Same thing, sometimes." After a pause, she added, "I liked what you said in there. You didn't come to gloat. You came to watch." "That's cold." "Necessary," he corrected. Another silence. Then she smiled. "Want to get coffee sometime? When you're done watching." He looked at her. She wasn't Mary. She wasn't trying to be. She was just someone standing still. He almost said yes. But instead, he said, "Not now." She raised an eyebrow. He sipped the last of his drink and looked out over the skyline. First, he said, let them suffer.